Good evening, everybody. We'll make a start. Welcome to our offices here at EY. I'm Simon O'Neill. I'm the managing partner of EY here in Birmingham and covering across the Midlands. Fantastic to see everyone here, and it's great to be hosting this event. So thank you to Tony and the team for jointly hosting this. It's the first type of this event that we've done, but delighted to be co-sponsoring this event. Having lived and worked in the Midlands for 20 years, I can honestly say that the momentum the city has is at a different level from any time I've seen it before. The growth, the coordination across businesses, organisations in the city, I think is at a different level. And I think that stands all of us in this room in good stead in terms of the future growth and the opportunities that that brings. I think there are some challenges though, and I think one of those challenges can be addressed by a number of people in this room. The number of businesses that have relocated here and the growth that your organisations and others are seeing has put a tremendous demand on talent and the talent pool that's here in the Midlands. And I think we need to do what we can as organisations to be growing that talent pool, because I think that could be one of the limiting factors on the growth that we could achieve. So I think we need to focus our organisations on it. I'm certainly focusing mine on how do we grow and what do we do here in the Midlands versus elsewhere in the UK. But I think it's also incumbent on us, sort of ambassadors for the Midlands, to be articulating to others about the benefits. Why do we live and work here? What does that bring to us in terms of our lives, our careers? Because I think there's some real benefits from working here that you don't get in other parts of the UK and broader globe. So it's just an encouragement from me at the outset. Looking forward to the discussion this evening. I just want to hand over to Tony for his opening remarks.
Great, well, thank you very much, Simon. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming along to what will hopefully be an interesting, insightful conversation. I'm just personally glad it wasn't last Thursday. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Tony Gleeson, and together with the two Jasons, Granger and Blakey, own the Gleeson Recruitment Group, and I've got the privilege tonight of interviewing two very talented individuals who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years, and I've watched both of the careers with great interest. For me, it's going to be very interesting to hear of their journey all the way from sort of young, newly qualified ACAs all the way to the heady heights of Group CEO of FTSE 100 companies. Simon mentioned there about the sort of developments, exciting developments, but I think that are unfolding here in our region, which I'm very passionate about, as you can tell from the accent. But I have been here for 30 years, and the other thing that I wanted to touch upon as to why I kind of came up with this idea, apart from the fact that Birmingham and the greater the West Midlands area is booming, is inspiration. I was actually having lunch with David down in London, sort of tail end of last year, and we had a good old chat. We've known each other for a while, and then after the actual lunch, I kind of thought to myself, you know, I've been recruiting finance accountancy people for, as I say, the best part of 30 years. How many guys do I actually know that have literally made it all the way to becoming, you know, Group CEO of one of the biggest companies in our country, and even, you know, having met Simon there, who's made the journey from graduate in Birmingham all the way to managing partner, and I think it's quite inspiring. So that's where the idea was born. So I thought I would get these guys along. They kindly agreed. You know, what does it take? How is it? What's the good things? What's the bad things? So here we are. Now, in terms of the format, it's going to be pretty straightforward. And between our gang and the Ernst & Young guys, we've come up with you know, a few questions that hopefully you guys will think are reasonable. Now, we have got the room until 8 o'clock, and I'm hoping, if we can sort of get through it, that we can then at the end of it sort of throw the mic out to the floor so that you can ask the more difficult questions, I'm hoping, rather than the nice questions I'm going to be asking the guys. So without further ado, let's begin. So I think the first question I'm going to fire out to both of you, if that's okay. and that is, when you were starting your career, what was your focus and why did you choose accountancy? So let's kick off with you, Andy.
So I don't think I had a great plan. I was because I was always very numerate, and if I'm honest, I guess it was a pretty easy choice. Really, I was at university. I needed to do something, and accountancy seemed I hate to say it, but probably an easy choice actually. Just in terms of what I did at university, I'd done business and mathematics. I was interested in finance, strong numbers, and I kind of just went there, and actually the first of what was then the Big Six I applied to was Ernst & Young, and they were significantly quicker than everyone else to interview me, and I did a first and second interview before I had a first interview with any of the others, and thought, well, actually, I'll just take that one, then they offered me the job. It was as simple as that. And I thought, well, I'll go with Ernst & Young, and it was because they were just so much quicker than the others. And I applied to 2 or 3 of them, and that's how I ended up in becoming a chartered accountant.
Big Six. Much younger than me.
Big Six.
It was Big 8.
Big Six.
What about you, David?
Yeah, well, just first of all, thanks so much, Tony, for inviting me here, and Simon for that too. Great to come back. It's spent a large part of my career in the Midlands and Birmingham specifically, and haven't been back that often. Definitely to do something like this, and a lot has changed. I mean, my gosh, just driving in, I couldn't believe just how much investment and regeneration's gone on. I know some of the companies involved in it, but really haven't seen it in the flesh. It's amazing. The other thing that's changed is the managing partners of the big firms. I mean, I used to think it was policemen that looked young, but actually managing partners of Big 4 firms got younger too. Although I did hear you say you're 20. You've lived and worked here for 20, so that makes me feel better. Yeah, okay. Okay, so but thank you. My journey. My journey here was into finance was sort of by accident. Basically, I was good with numbers as a kid, and probably I hadn't thought about this before actually. But my mum actually got me into this effectively because when I came from a pretty ordinary background, went to a comprehensive school in South Wales, and my mother for some reason took me to play golf at the local really scruffy short 9-hole pitch and putt. And from that I got interested in golf and ended up caddying at a golf club. And I noticed that all the best cars in the car park belonged to accountants or lawyers. And as I was quite good with numbers, I thought, okay, well, accountancy it is. I never really thought about anything else subsequent to that. So that's how I started in it.
I can relate to that, for sure. Okay, next question I'm going to give to you, Andy, on this. I was going to give them all both questions, but you guys wouldn't have a hope in hell of getting anything in between that time. So, at what point in your career did you start to kind of gain the kind of non-pure accountancy finance sort of experience?
So I was quite fortunate with the career choices I made. I joined when I left Ernst & Young. I did a year post-qualification. I joined a company that was based just south of Birmingham. It was quite unusual at times. It was a big PLC, but Midlands based. It was a company called Mices PLC. It was a big software company. Eventually became the first technology company to reach the FTSE 100. I joined that in January '95, and within 3 months they did an acquisition where they doubled in size. They bought a bigger competitor, and the opportunities that gave, and I got very involved then in a lot of the issues around the acquisition. Some were finance related, but you got much more experience. And although technically I was in their internal audit department, I think they spotted very quickly that I wasn't very good. And unfortunately, then I got involved in much more interesting projects. And then I think in 2.5 years I did 4 internal audits, which suited me fine actually. And I did a lot of the acquisition work. I suppose the first true non-finance job was in my next company, which was a private equity-backed IT company. I've been there a year. It was around the Y2K, and anyone that is old enough to remember that was the technology bubble. I joined a business that was going to float the bubble burst, and actually the company had a few challenges. They fired the commercial director and said, "You're now doing this job." I said, "It's not really what I was thinking about." They said, "Sorry, we weren't actually asking." And I worked with the sales team. So I moved completely out of finance, and I worked with the sales team for a year. And actually, that was a great experience at the time. And I was put in charge of commercials, legal, having to write and approve the first contract I did. That was certainly at the edge of my comfort zone, having never done that before. And pricing some big deals, and the company went through quite a transformation and moved from quite a low-end IT maintenance company to much more managed services. And I was pricing these with the sales guys, and people were just hanging anything I said about what we were going to make. People just took it for gospel, and it was quite interesting, actually, quite liberating. And I did that for a year before going back into finance. And I suppose when I finally stepped out of finance completely was then in 2008, 2009, where I took over the running of one of the divisions at Capita PLC, which I joined in 2001, and that came about. I was at that point I was the finance director across all of the non-financial services businesses. The group was kind of split in half, and I was across all of the non-financial services businesses. And my boss at the time was I reported both to the group CFO, but also to the group COO. The group COO said to me, he just fired one of the exec directors. He said, "I need to do a reorg. I need to announce it tomorrow." He said, "Do you want to do this job?" He said, "Just let me know in the morning." And this was, I was having a curry with him at the time. He looked at me saying, I did enjoy curry. And I was having dinner with this guy, and he just said, it was about 8 o'clock at night. He said, just let me know in the morning if you want the job or not. And that was it. And that's when I moved out of finance completely and took over in Capita's IT and software divisions, and that was when I really stepped away completely.
Brilliant. Yes, I remember the days. And over to you, David. I guess this will be a question that everyone's interested in. When did it kind of first become a possibility? Because you guys have got very different backgrounds and journeys, but when for you did it first become a possibility that the potential to become chief exec as opposed to CFO became a reality? It was never the plan.
It was. I mean, some people, I've met a lot of people actually who think they were born to be CEOs. Certainly haven't worked out very well, but I didn't plan to be a CEO. I sort of had brief skirmishes with general management at a couple of points in my career. So I spent 17 years with Arthur Andersen, and the last 7 I was a partner, and I was running the audit division here in the Midlands. And I really didn't really enjoy. I didn't really like the pressures of kind of managing the practice and trying to deliver the results that we had to deliver and the things that were required. So that kind of put me off a bit. And then I decided then to go out into industry. I knew nothing about running a finance function, but thankfully I had Mark Pegler here as my financial controller, and he made me look good. And so I kind of got away with being a finance director for a few years at Wagon PLC, Wagon Automotive. And then part way through that period, the then chief executive left the business rather hurriedly, and as the only other executive, and of course Jason also was there too, left the business rather hurriedly as the only other executive director. I was sort of left running the show. And I absolutely hated it. I mean, it was horrendous. I mean, we were producing automotive parts from how many was it? 17 plants around Europe, and it was pretty seat of the pants stuff at times. And I thought, this is no job for an accountant who trains a professional accountant to be trying to deal with all these engineering problems. So that put me off as well. So my next role then was to go to become finance director of a lovely property company, which was called Slough Estates then. And I absolutely loved that. I thought it was brilliant industry, brilliant company. Loved the chief executive I was working for. And I thought, you're all finance people. You kind of, I'm sure at times you think you could do the job better than your chief exec, or there are things that you do differently. But I was actually very happy from my previous experiences, just being a strong number 2. I thought, this is great. I could get involved in anything. Mark and I were chatting earlier. You can as a good, competent finance director, you can do anything in the business. You can go anywhere you like. You can ask any question. You can poke your nose in. It's actually quite a nice position, but ultimately the buck doesn't stop with you. And I thought, that's fine for me, I quite like that. And then my then chief executive, who's my predecessor, the company changed its name along the way, but he then said he was going to retire, and he encouraged me to put my hat in the ring. And at the same time, another headhunter phoned up and said they were recruiting for the FD of what was a FTSE 30 company. Okay. So I suddenly found myself in two processes. One was about being finance director of a FTSE 30 company. One was to be chief executive of SEGRO, as it's now called. I knew nothing about the industry of that other one, but I knew a lot about our business, and it actually had a very tough 10 years. It really hadn't performed very well at all. And I thought, and I'd been involved in it, we'd gone through the financial crisis, and I thought, it's not that I kind of think it's about me, and I was born to be a chief executive, but I thought, actually, I almost owe it to the business. I owe it to the shareholders, I owe it to the people to give it a go, because I actually think I know what needs to be done here, and I think I can do it. So I pursued it, and it was at that moment. It actually wasn't really until then that I had any interest or intention. It was kind of serendipity.
Well, yeah, I mean, how much, just to go back to that, how much of an influence in your decision was your respect for your predecessor and the fact that he was really keen for you to throw your hat in the ring?
It's a little bit of that, but I guess we're all, most of us, I suspect, in the room, especially if you come through the finance function, you kind of live with self-doubt, and you think, is this really me? Have I got the ego? Am I really that kind of person that wants to be? I mean, I was absolutely terrified at the thought of, being the number one and actually having to face up to the press. And I used to get nervous sitting in events like this when my chief exec was on the panel and I was sitting there. I don't know why, I was kind of referred nervousness, but oh my God, and it's bizarre, it's actually, maybe we'll chat about it, but in many ways incredibly liberating when you then actually do come and have a go and you sit there and...
Absolutely.
So it was partly that, yeah.
You seem to have got over it okay.
Yes.
Talking to Mr. Bregler, I agree, he tends to make me look good as well, but for different reasons. So I've got another question for you, actually, David. What was, having then made the transition to chief exec, what was the biggest challenge that you found? And making the leap from
I suppose the thing, I mean, if you're interested in, what I learnt, I guess what I've learnt about myself is that although I was good in numbers, I wasn't really interested in, finance per se. I was interested in the business that I see through numbers, and it's a great skill and a great background in many businesses to be able to understand the business through the financial lens. Yeah. If you're a good finance director, and I'm sure everybody in the room here has got amazing skills and a range of responsibilities, you get lots of broad exposure. But when you become chief exec, you suddenly have this hugely wider range of interests and things that you have to be knowledgeable on, and you have to have a view on. Yeah. I mean, obviously all the obvious stuff around the business, the strategy, the people, but I could be asked about my view on the gender pay gap, or it could be asked my view on green buildings and almost anything, politics, Brexit, impact of Brexit. So you have to have a knowledge. You suddenly have to have a knowledge and be willing to talk to people about anything. So that's kind of the breadth. The breadth is of the exposure. The breadth of you have to spread your time very widely. You can't deep dive into very much at all. So you have to choose. You have to gain that knowledge, and you have to choose then where you dip in, where you're going to spend your time, and try and have influence, because you absolutely can't do everything. And I guess so. The other thing that comes with that is you have to create the team around you. You have to create the people that can do. I mean, in theory, I don't have anything to do because there's somebody in my business that's responsible for everything. But I'm actually still quite busy. So it's that kind of the breadth is there. The other thing was just really the press thing. The press and the public profile and being in the media, and especially when you get into the FTSE 100. There's a lot of people that want to talk to you, and I say I used to be terrified of it, but actually you realise after a while, you just like everything in life, the more you practice, the better you get at it, and the easier it becomes, and you realise that most people you deal with, occasionally you get a few unpleasant people, but the vast majority of people you deal with out there, whether they're shareholders, investors, press, non-executive directors, they actually want you to do well. They want, you know, they want to hear a good story. So tell it to them.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit like the best man. Everyone wants them to do well. That's interesting, actually. I mean, I knew I kind of, you know, because I was speaking to Andy, the bread thing was a big thing, but then I guess going and facing all these people. How long do you reckon it took to start getting more comfortable?
Well, the good thing is that you. Well, the first thing I did was I got a coach. I thought, I don't need a coach. What do I need a coach for? I went to see three potential coaches. Two of them were kind of, you know, been there, done it, experienced business people. That, you know, I thought they'd just be a good sounding board. And the third one was almost he was a psychologist basically, and it was almost like lying down on the couch and, you know, let's pull you open and I thought, you know, what's this all about? And then I suddenly realised, well, this guy's going to be good for me. Yeah. But he forced me to think about, you know, how I work, why the way I am. Why do I do things the way I do them? And in particular, the most valuable thing was moving from being a finance director, where you've got broad responsibilities, especially as a board director, but you tend to have kind of a relatively narrow channel, and you're problem solving, you're fixing things. To one way, so if you try and fix everything yourself, you're just going to die under the weight of it. You know, there's so much you're going to have to do. You will completely be swamped. He said, what you've got to get comfortable with is not fixing stuff. And actually living with uncertainty, going to sleep at night, not knowing the answer to a problem, and just waiting for it to emerge. Now, you clearly have to take big decisions, and you have to be involved in big decisions, but don't try and fix everything yourself. Don't try and solve everybody's problem, because you'll have a line of people waiting outside your office that will say, what's the answer to the, you know, I've got a problem, boss, what's the answer? And you say, oh, it's do this, off you go. And if you do that, you'll never rest, you'll never sleep. So you've got to get out of that, and also get the people working for you out of expecting you to take all the decisions. Because if you try and take them all yourself, you will die under the weight of it.
You're saying. Very interesting, actually, very interesting. Over to you, Andy. Then, I mean, before you obviously came to CEO, you had a lot of commercial experience, so it wasn't like you were making, you know, straight from finance into CEO. But what were your perceptions of, you know, what it was going to be like, kind of, versus what it really was like? Was it similar, or was it different? Or?
In some ways, some bits were similar, because I was actually I'd already moved out of finance. I was going down the route of originally I was running a division, and then I was joint COO, so I had responsibility across again all the non-financial services part of the group, and a bit like David said, the previous CEO had done many things and delegated an awful lot of responsibility down, and therefore you were doing a lot of those. You were doing lots of parts of the job, other than the external stakeholder. That was the bit that you hadn't done. And again, what was interesting for mine when I thought about it is, again, even though I'd come out of finance in 2009, at no point did I ever think about becoming CEO. And actually, there was always an assumption, both on my part and a number of the people on the board, that actually I was going to go back into finance. And the board at the time had said, if anything happens to the CFO was aware of this, obviously, you would actually be the board's choice. So actually, throughout all that time, although I'd actually moved out of finance and was taking that responsibility for owning the business decisions, I always thought I was going to become the CFO. And at that point, most people were in the group. The previous COO who left the group in 2011, the assumption up to that point was he was going to become the CEO, and I would be. He was my old boss, and I was going to become his CFO. So when he left and becoming COO, I carried on out of finance far longer than I anticipated, and actually throughout all that time, in terms of thinking about my career, I was still thinking about potential CFO roles to go back in. So I never really got to that point of thinking about what was going to be different, other than obviously, by the time I took over, I'd not been in finance for over 5 years, and had done. So the way that the group was structured, you took an awful lot of responsibility on, other than that external stakeholder. In the group I worked, we did a lot of public sector work, and therefore it was quite interesting, because as David mentioned, people want views. We were very careful as a company. My predecessor was the same. Well, he was quite outspoken at times, but you were very careful about the views you took because half of the income from the group came from the public sector, and about half of the public sector actually directly was dealing with central government. So you were always very careful what position we took, and I remember during the Brexit campaign, we were asked every week, would we come out with a position? And people remember, I mean, the CBI, and I knew the Director General very well, actually, sort of an ex-head in the group, was desperate for us to come out publicly and support them. And we just said, we're never going to make a public position. And that was simply because we did so much in the public sector, we always viewed it so difficult. So a lot of the things about the job, I kind of the dress rehearsal as the joint COO, other than that external. And I guess the external bit was probably, I had a clear view of that. It was quite, the previous CEO was fairly outspoken about his view of a lot of these external stakeholders. It was worse than I expected, and it was probably the part of the job I liked. I enjoyed the least. Yeah, you know, the bit that was where you felt meaningful was when you were actually making an impact to the group, and when that was appointing people, you putting the team in place. That stakeholder engagement was probably the part of the job where you felt the least. It was the least rewarding part of the job, and it was probably the bit that you were least prepared for.
Yeah, but I guess it's very different from knowing your business to then going to a bunch of strangers.
Yes.
That you know you don't know, and it does take time. Okay, back to you, David. Because you know you were CFO. How did you kind of manage to let go of that and manage someone else into this? And I can't remember from memory, but was it an internal promotion, or did you go external?
I mean, in the end, we went externally to find my successor as finance director, and that was a very deliberate and conscious decision on my part, because I thought, as a new CEO, inexperienced in the role, if I promoted somebody internally who wasn't quite, hadn't done it before, basically, then it would be very easy for me to be dragged in and half do his job and half do my job. And I thought the right thing for the business and the right thing for me as a new CEO, where I had to learn my job, was to have somebody in that role who'd been there, done it, got the t-shirt. So we went externally, we got somebody, and it turns out I didn't really like finance anyway, so it was dead easy.
Yeah.
Because then he took it over, and happy days.
And you got it right.
Yeah, I did. I'm now actually on my second CFO, because the first one got fed up with me after about 6 years, and has gone into plural existence as a non-exec. And we've got another new young thrusting finance director who's doing a great job.
Yeah. So was it pretty easy?
I found that in that terms of that transition, I know there are, the corporate world is littered with horror stories of CFOs who become CEOs and don't let go of the finance function and try and do two jobs. Nightmare scenario, and I think it happens a lot, of course. And if I were in that position, we'll probably talk about lessons and experiences and advice, but boldness and bravery are quite important characteristics, and I think if you're good enough to be the finance director, even if your predecessor is now your boss, you've got to be big enough, brave enough, get your elbows out and say, look, you've got another job to do, I'll do this one, and if you're not willing to do that, then don't take it on.
Yeah, that's good advice. And back over to you, Andy. How did it feel, being the ultimate decision maker? Because yes, you were CEO, but the buck, as you said earlier, it's all about this buck stops with you. How did because there's a lot of pressure. There must be. I mean, I don't know. I've never been in this situation. But when you actually sort of the realization that literally the buck does stop with you, how do you sort of cope with that pressure?
I think the best thing you can ever do, and people talk about this all the time, but it's absolutely true, is you've got to consistently and continue trying to upgrade your team. You've got to put the best people around you to make decisions, because otherwise, if all the decisions come to the top, you just get swamped actually. the pressure never, it wasn't so much the pressure of making decisions that ever really worried me, and that really came from advice I had earlier in my career, which was I worked for a couple of people who were very, very decisive. And I remember other people asking them, do you never worry about making a decision? And they said, no, because you've got to believe that 9 times out of 10 you're going to make the right decision.
Did they?
Yeah, and actually they did actually, and it's one of those things they say, and then you just don't worry about that one you get wrong, and you've got to move on. And if you dwell too long on trying to make a decision, you just actually never get anything done, and therefore you've got to actually back your judgment. And that was something that I actually I took on board, and I think you do. The key on that is actually having enough good people around you that actually they're actually doing the right thing most of the time.
That makes the decision making
yeah.
easier, obviously.
And it does, and you know, it's one of those things throughout my career and all the roles I did. And it got progressively harder actually in terms of the other things that you got involved in, but actually spending a lot of time on getting the right people in. Obviously worked with yourself over the years when I was in finance, and you know, sort of quite late on actually in my finance career, I was still interviewing every finance director that came to my part of the business and the final interview, and I didn't, and actually it was to make sure that you're actually getting the right people around, and I think again on recruits I had a pretty good hit rate. You always get ones wrong, and again you have to take that view that if you got one wrong you dealt with it, but actually I'll blame you. Yeah. But you have to then you have to continue in whatever role you do in, make sure that you're actually surrounding yourself with the best talent available. And I think the moment you get that wrong is where you've got problems, and things can still go wrong. But if you've got the best people around you, more often things go right than wrong. And that's the key.
You were nodding your head.
I'm nodding. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody would agree with that. But undoubtedly, having the best possible people is the right thing to do, and clearly employing Gleeson Group to help you get there is essential. But what I would say is, what I would say is, one of my, sorry to jump in, but I'm sure you'd agree, and I suspect everybody's got experience with this. One of the lessons for me is, and the people decisions are often the hardest thing to get right, and because you're looking for performance, but you're also looking for cultural fit, you're looking for operational excellence, and you're also looking for strategic view and all these things. But the toughest thing is when you've got somebody who's got some of those things but not all of them. They're brilliant at some things, but maybe they're performing brilliantly but don't live the values, or and then what do you do about it? And absolutely my experience has been, sort of one lesson for me would be, take tough decisions on people earlier. Generally, I've never got rid of somebody and thought, I wish I'd taken another year to think about that. I've usually thought, I wish I'd done that earlier.
Yeah.
Wish I'd done that earlier.
They're both in agreement there.
Yeah, I mean, once you've made I can never remember having already got to the point of thinking, actually, this isn't working out where someone ever recovered. And okay, you've got to make that choice where, but there is that point where you do want to actually support someone, you do want to help them, and that's a big part of the role, and it's hugely rewarding. But there's got to be a point where you make that cut off and say, actually, this person's not working, and that's got to work throughout the organisation, and it's part of that point. I mean, I still remember probably the most difficult thing I ever did was when I taught someone about exiting them, and it had gone terrible, and they broke down in tears and basically started apologising to me for a bad job they'd done. And I said, look, we don't need to go here, but it hasn't worked out. And this person was profusely apologising. I said, look, we just need to draw a line under this and move on. But you just need to make those decisions, and they're never easy. And they're never easy when you've worked with people as well. And I guess the biggest frustration for me was actually with people was where you actually saw the organisation over-promote somebody, and actually someone who'd done a really good job for you, and actually you thought, we'll give them this chance in this new role. And particularly when you actually thought yourself, actually, not sure that's right, you over-promote someone and they fail, and actually often then you've actually got to exit them, and that was always one of the biggest disappointments with people, with someone that was actually really good at something, and actually you should have actually managed
Yeah.
you should have managed that, potentially even more opportunities, but in the space that they can do, and that was always one of those. But getting the right team around you was always the most critical thing of all the roles that you can do.
Yeah, but I've come across a few people that have the opposite view, which is like, you know, surround themselves with people that make them look good, and it never works. You're not as good as the people that.
I once worked with an IT program director on a big project at Capita, who was an absolute nightmare in that he was a very talented individual without a doubt, and he was one of those people where you'd really find someone who could work harder, but he surrounded himself with yes people who just run around for him whatever he did, and the problem was you then never got anybody to challenge him, and people like that they'll never grow, and they'll always ultimately fall over.
Agreed.
And if you see that, you've got to do something about it quick.
Good, thank you. Now I've got next one is for both of you. I mean, it's almost like a rhetorical question. But anyway, you know, have you made any mistakes during your career, and what did you learn?
No, nothing. Far too many to mention, that's I would say. And thankfully none of them have really been found out. So I've got away with them. The kind of the themes, I guess, for me in terms of, you know, what mistakes I've made would be generally people issues, where I haven't been bold enough, brave enough, early enough to deal with them, as I was kind of alluding to. And you know, so generally they come in under the banner of, you know, having the courage of your convictions. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the, you know, take lots of decisions as quickly as you can because you'll probably get 9 out of 10 of them right. Maybe because certainly in my industry we're making a relatively small number of very big bets on investment decisions. So you have to, you know, you really need to think about them and analyse them and take your time. But we've definitely missed some opportunities. We've definitely missed, you know, some opportunities by not being brave enough and bold enough. And so I kind of, you know, for me, it's, you know, all around, you know, do your homework and think about things. But when you've got an instinct and you think you know the answer, really back your judgment, go with it and do it, and have the courage of your convictions.
I think that's fair enough. I think a lot of people
yeah.
in the room could.
We're all honest. I mean, because we're all finance people, most of us, and we're all, you know, trained to be risk averse.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've just got to really push yourself out there. So I would say, you know, probably for people from a conventional finance background, you've got to force yourself to take a bold position and back your judgment.
If you believe it.
If you're instinctive, you know, if you've done your homework and the facts are there, and your instinct is, you know, you can't have perfect knowledge. You only with hindsight do you know exactly what was the right thing to do. Yeah. But have the courage of convictions and be brave, because it's not necessarily naturally the thing that people want to do who come from a finance background.
That's fair enough. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about those people issues, but again, if you go outside of that, I would say exactly as David just said, it's where you knew something was intuitively wrong, and at times not backing that judgment. And I still remember, you know, if I look back when I was COO actually, and the company was looking at an acquisition, I knew it was a dog, and the CEO at the time wanted to buy it for very specific reasons, and he was kind of ignoring some basic points, and he just had a belief that actually if I sweep aside all of these issues which were well known, he was basically saying, well, I know you're going to fix them anyway, so we should just buy this business. It was cheap, it had an incredibly big turnover for a very low amount of money. Unfortunately, it was a dog of a business. It was a business, and it was made worse because I actually knew it. It was actually it had part of a business I actually worked for previously when I was at Mighty, so to come right full circle. And I just knew this business was terrible. That was the reason why it was cheap. It was owned by Lloyds Development Capital, and but its revenue was huge. And at the time, the group actually wanted to bolster its revenue, and the CEO just said, look, you know, as long as it doesn't lose money, I don't care, we're getting for virtually nothing. And it was one of those things where you just think...
In retrospect,
what happened? You bought it?
We bought it, and I had a number of conversations with the CEO, and you know, it was one of those few times where I almost got to the point, I didn't fall out with him very often. It was one of the points where I almost fell out with him. Where I always said, you know, if you haven't got the balls to fix this, what are you doing in your job? And I sat there and I just thought, he has no understanding of how bad this business could get. And he did, and you know, he turned it around eventually. But you looked at it and thought the amount of effort that we put into that business, for the value it ever delivered, it was just a complete waste of time. But and I should have, and he wouldn't have done the deal if I'd have absolutely dug my heels in, and I knew that. And I basically, ultimately, thought, well, I understand why he wants to do this, and I agreed to do it. But I knew it was wrong. And
you obviously learned.
Yeah, and it was one of those where I should have just said to him no, and he was almost. And I knew at the time he was almost. There was a little bit of that where he was almost calling me out and saying, you know, have you going to be turning around?
But it's
that's really tough to do, though. To stand up to your CEO or chairman or whoever it is. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
Easy to say, I think you should do it,
yeah.
But harder to do in practice.
But it's interesting that you both come round to saying very similar things, which is, you know, back yourself. You know, if you're going to go all the way and you've got that self-belief, yes, you get things wrong, but it's more about you regret the things you didn't.
I think,
really push
definitely for
yourself,
me,
you know,
definitely.
nice
Even now in the last 6 years since I've been, nearly 7 years since I've been CEO, things I regret, the things that I didn't do, or the investment decisions we didn't take. Rather than it's dead easy to rationalise, you know, why you shouldn't do something. But it's harder to stick your neck out and say, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah.
We've done a few we've got right, by the way. but you know, if you're really being self-critical, it would be about.
It's interesting, honestly. Right, here's a little cheeky one to both of you. What's the best thing about being a CEO apart from the money? Right.
I guess one of the things, I guess it wouldn't even just been CEO, it's throughout your career, is when, for me, you always got a lot of, you always took a lot of pleasure when you could actually genuinely see how you can help develop people's careers. And I think that as you go through and the more senior you get, you do have that opportunity and actually identifying someone that's very talented and actually giving them, identifying them and actually plucking them out, giving them opportunities. For me, that was always throughout my career, actually.
I know.
And actually, you know, and giving people those opportunities. And I think the higher up you go, although it becomes more difficult actually, because you do become more remote, without a doubt. You do become more remote for the business. Actually, being able to just make those decisions and not have to justify it to anyone, actually, and just do it.
Just get on with it. And I think it's a really, really good point, actually. And I can empathise with that. What about yourself?
It's. I mean, I'm obviously a slow learner because it took me a long time to realise it is absolutely the best job in the world, provided it's in the right company and you believe in the company, what it does, and what you're trying to achieve. But it's an incredible privilege to have that responsibility to effectively set out a strategy, create a team, motivate people to deliver it, create a culture, bring people on. It's just, and it's fine. You know, our business is going incredibly well right now, and of course we have times when it's not going so well. But it's an incredibly privileged position to be a CEO and to have that responsibility. And you know, people you said to me, oh, you know, it's a very lonely position being CEO. Rubbish. I mean, it's fantastic. You know, you've got you know, lots of friends and support around you. You've got to create your network around you. But I've never felt isolated or worried about it. You know, I've got a great team of both executive directors and non-execs and team leaders, and just, you know, it's a very privileged position. So incredibly rewarding to you know, put a plan together and help other people to deliver it. So
sounds like a good gig. I hope that inspires you guys.
Money's not bad too.
Okay, this one's for you, David. What were your relationships, you know, I guess previously and now, with the kind of non-exec and investor relations, and what is it like to deal with them once I guess you get the hang of it?
Yeah, I never found. I mean, it was originally a little bit daunting talking to investors and analysts. and definitely one of the most difficult times of my life was during the global financial crisis, when we literally had to go around in February 2009, cap in hand to investors to say, we were doing a rights issue. I mean, it was odd because it was, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the rights issue process, but it's basically a gun to the head of the shareholders, which is backers, or you lose all your money. But it was a really, quite a daunting thing in a very uncertain world at the time to go to investors and actually ask them to put money in.
Yeah.
And then we went back 6 months later because we found an acquisition. We thought it would be a good idea to buy our biggest competitor, and we were told, don't do it, don't go back twice in 6 months. But we did it, and they backed us. And the reason why they backed us is because the team of which I've been part of, we'd invested a long time. We've been very transparent, very open. We told people exactly what we were going to do, and we delivered it, usually plus a bit more. Mark and I were chatting about this earlier. So my view is it's actually nowhere near as daunting as it might seem, whether you're the FD or the CEO, whether it's non-execs, whether it's the press, whether it's analysts or investors. If you're, and by the way, we talked about Wagon earlier. Difficult company, difficult times. I've still got shareholders now in SEGRO who are big loyal supporters who were investors and knew me in my time in the dark days in Wagon, and they remember it very well. And they remember, I believe, that I was transparent, open, told them how I saw it, didn't overpromise, didn't bullshit. And that's kind of got a recipe for success in the business world and perhaps life generally, which is one of my previous bosses said, don't ever tell any lies, don't over bullshit, because if you start telling lies, you'll never remember which lie you told to which person. So just stick to the truth, keep it simple, and and all will be fine. And I've always followed that view. And so transparency, openness, I'm kind of fairly simple and straightforward, and I try and make the complex simple. If I can understand it and make it in simple terms, then usually other people can too. So it's just about simplicity, transparency, whichever stakeholder you're talking to. And it's nowhere near as daunting. And what you think might be dull and boring, the press might find incredibly interesting.
But also having the courage to have that humility and say, we need you guys at this point in time because of circumstance and external factors.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's obviously...
Well, humility is quite an important characteristic that I would recommend thoroughly.
I've met a few CEOs that don't seem to share that view, but they're not accountancy background. Okay, Andy, this one for you, right? What is the best piece of advice you would give to you sort of 15 years ago?
I think for anybody to get on, I think always take the opportunities that come your way, and I think it's that no regrets. And I think when you do get an opportunity, particularly to do something outside your comfort zone, and I think the learning you get from doing things that you haven't done before, and you really put yourself in areas where it is that big learning curve, and just grabbing those opportunities. And I think
you kind of did that anyway.
I did kind of do that, and I think I never really mapped out my career. I only ever applied for I think it was only ever when I moved actual companies I ever applied for a job. All my own moves were kind of offered to me, and I think it was when you do get offered something, I think you just have to grab it. And I think for anybody who wants to get on, I think the things you'll always regret are not taking those opportunities. And I think at times where you're going to make the biggest steps in your career is where you're offered something which, in a lot of cases, you won't have thought about, and you've just been given something. And I think you just have to grab those, and I think those opportunities are the ones that, when you grab them and they go well, probably the most rewarding. And I think for anybody, when they're looking at their career, it'll be the things where they didn't actually take advantage of an opportunity. And I think for anybody, I think when you give them that opportunity, I think you just grab it with both hands and not worry about actually where it's going to lead, because often to lead to a lot of good opportunities. And I think when you don't take those chances, those are things. Yeah,
and kind of what you were saying when you were faced with this dilemma of, you know, FTSE 30, you know, group CFO, which ostensibly would have been a dream in some ways, but you then, you know, you grabbed the opportunity to become CFO.
Well, I was lucky that there were two opportunities in my case that sort of presented themselves. But I mean, for me, I did agree with what Andy said, but I think for me, there's also an element of grab the opportunities. But it sounds incredibly cliche, so apologies for that. Life is not a dress rehearsal. You know, so whatever you're doing in your career, make sure it's something that you think is worthy of your time. Because a lot of other things, it's a huge world out there, a lot of things you can do, and if you don't like the company, you don't like the job, you don't like the route you're taking, you know, there's loads of opportunity, you know, whether it's here in Brum or beyond. I mean, you know, don't end up doing something you don't like or working for a company you don't like. I mean, you know, make sure it's worthy of your time.
It definitely becomes clearer the older you get. That
Funny, it does, doesn't it?
I'll just check on the time. I will put a good time. This is another one to both of you. Especially to the guests that are here tonight, what would be your advice to other CFOs or people that are, you know, going to be CFOs in due course? You know, what would be the advice in terms of how to go about getting that transition into a CEO role? I mean, it's both happened to you almost not by accident,
no,
but it kind of has, hasn't it? So is there a strategy that in retrospect one can adopt? I've heard before that it's the way to do it is to kind of outperform the rest of the board and the other areas. I don't think there is a magic formula and there's no two people the same or no two situations the same, but you just, there's a variety of different things around, what you do in your role. You clearly, I've always regarded, it's a bit like, climbing Mount Everest. You know, you've got to get your base camp right, so you've got to get the finance function really humming, get the people in place, get people who are overqualified, preferably somebody who can take over from you, or succeed you at some point in the future, get a really good team in place, and then spend as much time as you can out in the business. I mean, the reason why I think I made a half-decent CEO and was considered for the job was probably because I was more, and I only realised it later, I was more interested in the business than I was in the numbers, in the finance per se. So get out in the business, and build relationships, because one thing, going back to this point about it's lonely at the top kind of thing, it isn't, but it's very interesting how an organisation works. I mean, what I've discovered is that good news travels faster than the speed of light. Everybody wants to tell you how wonderful things are. Bad news, for some reason, doesn't. It gets sort of, and so if you build your network out there and get of people throughout the business, not in the finance function, but in the finance function as well, at different levels. You just get a richness of, to sense where the organisation is and what's going, and you hear stuff and you find out stuff that you might otherwise do. So I think building relationships, having an interest in the business, obviously really understanding the business is critical. But beyond that, it's kind of. That's all good points.
Well, I mean, just as David said, I think to make that transition away from finance, you've got to have a genuine interest in the business and actually. Coming from that finance route, actually you have a unique opportunity to understand the drivers of a business, and I think that's an important thing. But if it's just looking at the numbers for numbers' sake, that's just not, it's not going to help you. You've really got to be able to utilise what the numbers mean. And if I go back in my career again, when I did that role as head of commercial, bizarre as it sounded, I was the first person that actually put together a pricing bid where I actually used the cost base of the company to actually explain how you actually price. And up to that point, it was they threw some numbers out. It just happened that in most cases it worked. And I always remember very early on, for the first couple of days of doing this job, someone came to me with a deal and said, "Can you sign this off?" And I said, "No." And they said to me, "Well, that's your job." I said, "No, my job's to approve it." So what's the difference? I said, "I can't approve this." And the next thing, he stormed out of my office, he slammed the door, this salesman. You gotta love salesmen at times. And next thing is the CEO of the company phoned me up and said, "What's wrong with this deal?" And I said, "It's a shit deal." And he said, "What's wrong with it?" He said, "Why?" I said, "You'll lose money." He said, "Well, why?" I said, and it was, a big part of what the company did, it was hardware maintenance. So it supported PC service printers. I said, you don't know, every printer we have on support we lose money on. And the CEO who set this company up, actually been running for a number of years, said, really? I said, yeah. And all the data was in the company.
What about the revenue?
And it was this thing where they just looked and thought, well, look at, yeah, it was, what about the revenue? I said, you know, every time we put one of these printers on maintenance, we lose money. I said, I understand why we have to do them on some of the bigger deals where they're part of a bundle. I said, this is just pure printers. I said, you'll lose about 20% on this deal. And he said, oh, that's interesting. And I'm thinking, oh, really? Fairly obvious. But it was the ability, the way you took then, and it was because I'd actually been the financial controller of this company, and I actually understood the cost base and the drivers, and then use that to actually understand how you actually price this business. And it was fascinating. And then that actually led to that exact point about revenue, where he actually came to the CEO, and I went very well, and I still know him today. And he said, do we lose much money on many contracts? I said, yeah, actually. I said, yeah, we do. Actually. I said, you know, basically, you can just split all these contracts. I said, some of them, I said, are phenomenally profitable. And I said, and there's all these. And I said, we should just cancel them. And it was a it was a big move for the company at the time. It was a very sales-led organisation. To them, revenue was everything. And they just assumed if you did a deal, you'd make money. And they didn't understand that actually, in absolute numbers, a lot of contracts lost money. Just having had some much bigger ones that made a lot of money. And no one had actually looked at that. And they had a model that threw these numbers out. It was just wrong. And no one had actually thought about looking at this model and actually comparing it to actually the cost of the company. And again, it was an interesting company because every bit of data that you needed was available, and no one had ever thought about it. But it's that interest in actually how the numbers affect the business is what's so important if you're going to make that leap.
But so why was the pricing? Why was the pricing at that level? Was it because it was the competitors were there? Or?
It was just that thing where it just become a norm where they just most of the pricing back then, and so this was late 90s. Most of the pricing of a maintenance on a piece of IT hardware was effectively a factor of the cost of the equipment, and for a lot of things, and then he took account of how often he expected it to break down. The problem with printers was they broke down too often, and people always underestimated how often. Yeah, they do. And actually, and that's why he said actually, people want to put these on contracts, just charge so much more money, and it was that factor, and just said if you just got rid of all of these, which is what ultimately did. But it was very hard for a CEO who was a natural sales. His background was sales, to actually stop billing people, and actually it was a very big moment for him, and quite a hard transition. But I mean, the other thing again, which is just little things. I just explained to them little things like our cost base is pretty fixed. When we discount off this fixed price, it's all margin. And so, what do you mean? And I said, we have this deal for £100,000. You've agreed to sell it for 90. Actually, nothing's changed in our delivery. That was all margin you've just given away. He said, no, we just gave 10% of the profit away. I said, no, it's all profit. And I said, you just took a deal that was fairly profitable to now being pretty crap, actually. And it was just like, it was interesting because I was quite fortunate that the CEO actually listened to me, other than as opposed to doing what I did to the previous commercial director, which was just fire him. Who was a classic of an individual who was just not. We talked about courage and conviction. This was a guy who actually wasn't a stupid individual, but he was never strong enough to stand up to salespeople. And actually, he understood a lot of what I actually then went on to do, but he just never had the confidence to say no to anybody, including a salesperson or including the CEO. And again, that was a big learning. That was a big learning for me. So part of that is having the confidence in your own understanding. You've got to believe.
It goes back to what you guys have been saying consistently now.
But it comes back to that. You have to understand the business drivers, and the numbers tell a story, and that's the key thing. And if you understand what that story is, it puts you in a great position. And I think you've got to actually have that really inquisitive mind. I think, and it doesn't mean that you definitely want to become a CEO. But I think without that inquisitive mind of actually thinking, how does this then affect the business? a real problem.
I think that's fair. It kind of leads me on to the next question in a sense, because I was going to ask you about what you'd be looking for in a potential CEO, but you've kind of answered that already. We did a little bit of kind of research, and it's around a quarter, it's 23%, but it's around a quarter now of FTSE CEOs are actually qualified accountants. So do you, have a view on this as to, why this number is increasing? Is it because the city's
because lots of sales-based CEOs who aren't very good with numbers end up getting fired, and somebody has to step in.
Yeah. But do you think that's going to continue? The proportion of finance background individuals becoming.
Well, it's a fantastic background. I think, as everybody in the room would agree. It's, there are some times in some organisations where you need a different skill set, clearly, and so there's no perfect answer for every business. But for a lot of businesses, a good commercially orientated finance background is a fantastic basis for becoming a CEO. But there's a broader issue which is the diversity issue. Which I don't know whether you're going to maybe we'll come to that, because I think apart from being a finance someone with a finance background, probably being a woman is quite a good place to be right now, because frankly we have got an issue there, but maybe we'll come on to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, as everyone will be aware, it is International Women's Day, and I've actually spoke to you guys separately about this actually years ago, because you both independently said to me years ago that you didn't have enough diversity and you felt it was an issue. This isn't just.
I've actually broken one of my rules, one of my New Year's resolutions of 2018, being here tonight at all. Especially, which I've only just dawned on me, and I feel bad about, which is never again sit on an all-male panel.
Well, that's. Well, I mean,
because I think there is, there's a, we've got there is a serious issue in business. It's not just, of course, about gender, but gender is the particular focus about diversity, and broader inclusiveness is a big issue. It's particularly an issue in my industry, because.
But I want to hear from both of you on this, because it is an important issue, and it's a sort of penultimate question, and it's something that's dear to my heart as well. Because I think diversity is incredibly important. But I really, as the position you guys have, as you said, a privilege to be in. How are you going to change it? I mean, what are you doing about it? I just want your views on it, because it's not an easy topic, but I really want your views on behalf of all the people here tonight.
Do you want to go?
We have talked about this.
I mean, the one thing I'd say about the accountants and the boards, and particularly chartered accountants, the one thing I would say is the big accounting firms, the investment they make in people is phenomenal. I mean, and I think it's only when people leave a firm such as this, people realise no other organisations outside, I guess, of other consultancies invest them as much as the accounting firms in their people, and it really pays off. And I think that's why actually their ability to become a very rounded businessman actually is so good starting in this sort of environment. In terms of diversity, it's unquestionably a big challenge. I know. I've said to you before when we were recruiting, I've never been a fan of positive discrimination. I think it's wrong. But actually, you're almost saying, can you actually send me some CVs to actually be able to see a choice? And at times, being quite difficult. And it's the same actually on through the business side. Whether people like it or not, I think the very fact that ladies take a career break for families, it has to be, it's never helpful for them. And even if you try and support them, people can take quite a block, and it often, they're actual, you do put a lot of hours in, and for a lot of people it changes after children, and how many people, and I do know a couple actually, but there isn't many where the husband makes the choice of becoming the person that stays at home, and the lady goes back to work, and all those things, without a question, affect it, and there's no point people pretending that doesn't, because it does. After that, I think, I worked at a firm where I think you can actually say, well, it was a meritocracy, but there wasn't enough there wasn't enough diversity, unquestionably, full stop, and that there wasn't enough senior ladies who really wanted to continue through, and it was very, very difficult. And like I said, for a number of times we'd go, and when we're recruiting people on the business side, we'd talk to recruiters and say, you know, we'd really like to have some female candidates, and at times they really struggled. And you kind of went back and said, I do not believe there isn't some candidates out there. You know, you must be able to demonstrate, and I think it's a real challenge for business in an awful lot of sectors.
Well, I mean, I think in every single sector, to be quite honest, there's massive room for improvement, and it will come, in my opinion, and it's really about what you can do as an individual to try and, you know, make positive change.
I mean, look, it's a long-term process. I mean, I think there's a lot of great focus. I mean, I feel there's almost too much focus on gender diversity as opposed to broader diversity right now. But I suppose the argument is, well, you know, there's 50% of the population that's kind of not really being properly included in the workplace, so that's getting a lot of attention. But I think, you know, I'm sure it won't stop there. It needs to be much broader than that. But I think you've got to be really careful in this area, because I don't know any woman that wants to be appointed to a role because of her gender. Yeah. And equally, I don't want to piss off, frankly, all the men in my organisation and beyond who think that actually, you know, that if they're not a woman, they're not going to make progression. So it's a very difficult, delicate subject. But we've got to make change. There are differences between men and women generally in terms of some of the challenges and issues they face. I didn't believe it when I was told it. But I kind of do believe it now, that one of the things about one of the differences between men and women, and this is a terrible generalisation, but for example, men look at this is relevant to your world, which is I'm raising it. Men look at an application or a job spec that's a sort of level up, and men look at it and say, crikey, I can do 6 out of 10 of the requirements. Yeah, I can. Fine, that's it. I'm going for it. Women look at it and think, oh God, I can't do 4 of the things. I better not put myself forward. Yeah. How we've interpreted that in our, there is evidence to prove that, and I've talked to women in my business, and they've confirmed it. And so what we've said is, well, we're going to do a few things. One is, when we've got an opportunity internally, we're going to actually identify women that could put themselves put their hat in the ring and say, we think you should apply. You may not think you can do it. We think you should apply for that. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, because you're going to be up against men as well, but we think you should apply because you'll learn something at least through the process. And the other thing we're doing is using using headhunters for more roles deeper in the organisation, because that way we can insist on a diverse shortlist. So if you just advertise something, people apply and you may not. But if you go and say, right, we're going to employ somebody to search and find candidates, and your challenge, Tony, is to make sure we've got 50% men and women, then you can see some candidates that you might otherwise see. I mean, we've just hired this is sort of talking out of school a little bit. We've just hired a non-exec, and we're actually in the process of hiring a number of non-execs. But you've no idea how hard it was to get the headhunters to take. When we say, look, we want diverse candidates, we want to interview some women as well as some men who could fit this particular role. They say, yeah, absolutely, of course, yeah. They've signed up to whatever that code is that your headhunters have to sign up to, but they just gave us all men, and actually they were promoting the men. In fact, what I'd said to them was, I don't actually want to interview any men until I've interviewed your best 3 women for this role. And actually they put men in the diary for me to meet. And I said, I'm not seeing them, cancel them. I want to see some women first, and then I want to know a benchmark. So you've got to, I think we as whether finance directors or chief executives, have to intervene. Not to, it's not about it's a level playing field. It's not an unbalanced playing field. Going back to my earlier point, it's got to be balanced, but we've got to do more to try and create a more inclusive corporate environment, and that goes to everything from networking events, doing more things that are gender neutral.
But I think your point about this 6 out of 10 good things versus 4 out of 10 negatives. I think, I know it's generalist, but I kind of believe that is true to a large extent.
Not for everybody, but for some.
But for you to actually proactively sort of put people forward that they might feel that they, not just women, it could be a minority of any shape, form, whatever, but to sort of take the initiative on that, I think
Yeah.
is encouraging, and I hope more people in your position can do that.
We did a on the corporate hospitality thing. So when I had some group discussions with some of the women all around our business from the UK, from Slough, London out to Warsaw, and one of the women said, so we have a box at Twickenham. One of the women I've chatted to said she's really quite keen on rugby. I said, oh, have you been in the SEGRO box? And she said, yeah, I went last season. But it was sort of by accident. It basically because, and this was quite an experienced, qualified surveyor. She said the graduate trainee in my team, who was a male, had been invited to go, and he couldn't make it. So he asked me whether I could stand in. Because she was a woman, she'd be completely bypassed. She wouldn't be stood.
Yeah.
So I said the group of women could take the box for the next game, which happened to be the Australia-England game last autumn, which is a brilliant one. But it's that kind of thing, So there is amazing amounts of unconscious bias in all organisations, and I think you just got to really be very thoughtful and conscious and call it out when it. With each other. So, our team has kind of signed up to these principles of being fair and equal and inclusive, and important part of that is calling it out when we see each other doing something that isn't neutral or isn't inclusive, saying, are you sure you meant that? Because it came across as slightly biased.
Good.
So we'll see, but it's going to be a long journey.
The other thing, when we talk about corporate hospitality and networking events, I know the Director General of the CBI very well, actually. So she was an ex-non-executive captor, and I always remember her saying, actually, a lot of the networking events actually are naturally biased against ladies, where often they will want to go home, they've got families, and there's much more pressure for them to get home. And saying, actually, events that are just after work, fine, dinners, she said, actually they're just not well suited, and that's why, and I don't imagine everyone's been them, and you go to these events, and they are dominated by men. But I think another point you mentioned, David, which I think is absolutely right, I know people at my organisation talked about, say, in the top 3 levels, when there was going to be an appointment, they should make sure there's at least that diversity. I always thought, actually, far more important to do that, the levels below, and actually the diversity needs to start much lower in the organisation. And if you do get that right, I'm saying it's easy because it's not, and we all know that, that should actually help. But if you just make that token appointments there, much harder then to pass that down. But if you get it lower down the organisation, you've got a chance, but it's so hard, isn't it? But I don't think anyone's very right yet. No. But it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, we have got a little bit of time, so thank you guys for indulging all my questions. I would like to throw the floor out to you guys and ask if you've got any question for the guys. So does anyone want to kick us off? I know it's like karaoke, no one wants to do it, and then 10 minutes later they're all fighting for the microphone. Thank you.
So you've obviously both enjoyed the transition to being a CEO. Your personalities obviously seem to suit it. Are there any personality traits that would sort of make a good CFO, not necessarily a good CEO?
I think the sort of the archetypical view of a finance person is in the detail, very numbers focused, operational. I think and it's not unique to finance people, but being able to stand back, be strategic, big picture. It's easier said than done because you've got to produce numbers and you've got to be on top of the detail. But that's probably sort of the hardest thing for a lot of people, is to get out of that. And it's not just finance people, anybody in business, get out of your day-to-day operational stuff and be more strategic. That would be it.
Kind of that point you made about being able to not trying to feel you have to fix everything all the time.
Exactly, but definitely being seeing the strategic picture. It's like Andy's discussion around that brilliant photocopier contract. I mean, great. Well, we've got all this revenue, but you're losing a shed load of money. Fantastic. The numbers probably all stack up, but if you don't have the view as to where you make money as a business and where you're trying to take it, that would be it for me.
Yeah, I think that's right. The ability to step back. I always remember I was involved in implementing the first one, the congestion charge, and I was telling a story. It's a slightly different one. Was the day before we went live, we had a bit of a meltdown on the phones. Everyone decided they wanted to phone in the call centre to ask about this the night before we went live, and the ops director and somehow managed to plan not to have many people in the call centre that night because we were very busy. And the call centre was just in meltdown, and everybody in the building was being trained up to go on the phones, including an executive director of Capita, the overall programme director. And I just thought, this is crazy. I looked at some data, and I went away, and they said to me, "We got on the phones," and I said, "No." And I went away, and I talked to my finance team that was in already, and I said, "Are we taking any payments?" And they said, "No." I said, "Are you sure?" They said, "Yeah, no payments coming through." And I went back to the overall programme director and said, "We need to switch off the inquiry line, because anybody who wants to try and get through and pay for tomorrow, and we know we're going to struggle to take everyone's payment tomorrow, nobody can get through." And he said, "No, that's not right." I said, "It really is. And it's, people be aware of RDRs." And I said, "We just need to switch off number 3. He said, "We can't do that." I said, "We really should." We switched it off, and the whole floor went quiet. And no one was phoning up to do exactly what we needed. The only point of having anyone on the phones that night was to try and ease the bow wave we expected the next day, where we really didn't believe we'd be able to answer everyone's call and take payments. And actually, people just on the phones having a chat. And I just said, "What's all this about?" You can't think, why is anyone interested in this now? And actually, it's just costing me money.
Yeah.
And it was that fact that, and everybody, they all went mad and said, "Look, we're going to train everyone on the phones." And I said, "I'm not going on the phone." And it was that ability, and I think you took probably sometimes step back and be prepared to actually just say no. I didn't want to answer the phones either, to be fair. So.
Okay, any other questions?
David, you mentioned that you had a bit of coaching as you went into the job. Do you still, both of you, do you have mentors that you, or confidants that you use more than other people within the job, just to, as a sounding board, and just make sure you're
yeah, I mean, for me, so I had a coach for a while. Once I'd been perfectly rounded, then I stopped. Now, after a while, you kind of you kind of run your course with what you're trying to do. So I sort of probably for a couple of years, quite intensively for the first year. It was like I had a monthly meeting. It was like going to meet the headmaster, you know, and finding out what I'd done wrong, had to explain myself. It's really, I mean, it was quite painful, but ultimately very good, because it made me stop and think a lot more than I would otherwise have done. And then it tailed off after a couple of years, because I thought we'd run our course there. So now, no, but what I find is I don't have a sort of formal mentor and not a coach, but I find that I've got sort of go-to people for different topics. Different, you know, horses for courses. I pick, you know, if I've got a particular issue on a particular subject, sometimes it might be an internal colleague, but it might be somebody externally that I know, and I'll pick and choose and you know, use different people for different things. And for me, that works really well, because that means I haven't got to share everything with any one person, which I always felt a bit nervous about. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say actually, having a coach, I think they do have a shelf life. I think having a coach, I think, is really important actually, and that just helping you be a little bit reflective. But then, for me, I probably do have a couple of mentors, probably more confidants, I'd say, where you can just sometimes go and actually ask and you just talk about a specific issue in the general terms. I think sometimes it's just quite useful to be able to go talk to someone that's not directly in the business, but you can talk to, and I think that's quite important actually. And a lot of that comes through networks you develop over the course of your career, and I do think that's important, to be able to go and just talk to someone who's not in that firing line, and just be able to talk to someone completely independent. So I do think that's quite important.
Just check on the table. I think we've got time maybe for two more questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Really quick question. It's quite a direct one. Have you ever been criticised for acting as a CFO when you've been a CEO and thought, actually, that criticism is correct?
Yeah, no, I'm terrible at taking criticism, but yeah, no, I have. Not by my first CFO, because he was far too polite and deferential, but when I thought I perfected it and I got my second CFO, he joined last January, and so he joined just before we did the results process, and then we went straight to do quite a big rights issue to raise money for an acquisition and to fund our development programme. And we sat down after the year, and he said, how do you think it went? I said, yeah, pretty well, yeah, good, yeah. He said, I thought you were far too involved in it, and I wasn't sure whether you were doing part of my job. So having said what I said earlier, I thought, yeah, God damn it, he's probably right. And I'm, hats off, great that Showman, his name is, that he was willing to do that. And it was, I hate it. It's really, really uncomfortable when people criticise me. But it's really good for me too. So having somebody who's willing to do that actually is incredibly valuable. Yeah, it does take courage, and that's what I need. Rather, you need a team, because particularly after I've been doing the job for a few years and it's been relatively successful. You've got to have that. Having a bit of fresh blood in the team and some new people around as well to sort of ask difficult questions, rather than all believing your own bullshit.
Yeah.
So for me, probably not when I was group CEO, because I'd been that long out of finance, but certainly when I first moved into being a divisional CEO, a couple of people were fairly blunt with me to say, when are you going to stop doing my job as well? And to be fair, they were right, actually. I mean, I think it was that first transition. When it is that transition, and just letting go was quite difficult, particularly when it was almost like a comfort blanket in a way. You really understood that, and you felt you understood it more than the person doing it now. So yeah, when I first moved into that as a divisional CEO, without a doubt, and they were absolutely right.
Yeah, but I actually know a few of your MDs, not even FDs, that used to say that bugger knows my business better than I know it, actually. I asked him, I said, do you? And he said, yeah, I do. So, one last question?
During the course of the evening, both of you talked about how you felt decisions. You talk about all your sensory kind of way of making those decisions. Do you think that's because that's the way you are now, or do you think that's actually probably how you got into your positions?
For me, I think it's probably a bit of a mix. You sort of, you are what you are. The things I'm bad at, I've probably always been bad at, and the things I'm good at, probably, more aware of that. I think, you evolve it. I think but what you do is, as time goes on and you get a bit older and a bit more experience, you just get more self-aware and probably more confident about what you're trying to do, what you should be doing.
Yeah, but I think part of the reason why you got the job was that ability to make decisions. I think the difference is early on in career, there is that, I suppose there's that safety net where someone else actually ultimately can say no. But I think you get those opportunities because you are making the right decisions more often than not. And I think that you've got to have that confidence to back your judgment. And I think that's an important part of really moving out of finance, where you are taking that responsibility, and there is no one there to say, are you sure? And you are that decision maker.
Great. Well, listen, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you both, and it's been really amazing.